My name is James. Once, I was the man behind the lights, the silent hand that turned events into legends. But success is fragile, and envy is a poison that seeps through even the brightest glow. I built an empire of brilliance, only to watch it stolen, piece by piece. And when they erased my name, they gave birth to something far darker. This is not just a story of rise and fall. This is the story of vengeance, whispered through shadows. A tale of betrayal, obsession, and the hunger to reclaim what was mine. When the lights went out, I did not fade. I became the darkness itself. I remember the first time I walked into the fancy hotel, back when I was nothing more than a young technician, carrying cables on my shoulders and hope in my chest. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and marble, chandeliers like frozen lightning above my head, and I thought, one day, I'll own this place not with money, not with titles, but with my craft. Back then, nobody knew my name. I was just another invisible worker in black clothes, setting up lights, tuning sound systems, hauling crates. But I had something most didn't: obsession. I didn't just plug in cables. I studied them, memorized their behavior, understood how sound traveled in every corner of that grand ballroom. While others saw buttons and wires, I saw symphonies waiting to be born. It started small. A corporate event here, a wedding there. I'd stay after hours, tweaking the lights until the shadows danced exactly how I wanted. I learned the acoustics of the ballroom, like the back of my hand, where a whisper could echo like thunder, where a voice could vanish into nothing. Guests would clap for the speeches, toast the brides and grooms, applaud the CEOs, but deep down, I knew some of that applause belonged to me, because I made them shine. Word spread. Get him for the next event, they'd whisper. He's the one who makes the room come alive. And little by little, the invisible technician became a name that carried weight in those golden halls. I can still remember the first wedding where my setup made a bride cry not from sadness, but from awe. She walked into a ballroom bathed in golden light, soft music curling through the air like smoke, and tears rolled down her cheeks. Her father turned to me later, eyes wet, and said, "You gave her a memory she'll never forget." That was the night I realized this wasn't just work. It was art. I'd built an empire of perfection inside that hotel. Every spotlight angled like brushstrokes on a canvas. Every bass note tuned like a heartbeat. The managers began to notice. They'd call me in for the big events, the important ones, the nights that could make or break reputations. I became their secret weapon. And with every success, I rose higher. Money came. Enough to buy a sleek black car, the kind that purred like a beast when I touched the accelerator. Enough to move into a condo that overlooked the city skyline, where at night I'd sip coffee on the balcony and tell myself I had made it. Friends admired me. Clients respected me. The staff at the hotel nodded when I walked in. Some even smiled with a touch of envy. But it wasn't the money or the admiration that drove me. It was the feeling. That electricity when the lights dimmed, the music swelled, and the room held its breath in awe. That was my drug. That was my power. For a while, I lived like a king in the shadows. No one saw me on stage, but everyone felt me. And then he arrived. Mr. Disaster. That's what I call him now, though back then, he walked in with a different name, a different mask. He wasn't a technician. He wasn't an artist. He was a parasite. A man with no skill, no craft, but an uncanny ability to charm. His suit was always sharp, his smile practiced, his voice smooth as honey. To the managers, he looked like success. To me, he looked like a storm cloud. At first, I didn't worry. How could I? I had years of skill, a reputation built on perfection. He had cheap gear, untrained workers, and illusions. Surely, the hotel would see the difference. Surely, they would choose quality over showmanship. But charm is a dangerous weapon. Slowly, contracts I expected began slipping through my fingers. A wedding went to him. A gala. A corporate event. I told myself it was a fluke, that he'd fail, and they'd come crawling back. But he didn't fail, not in their eyes. Even when his setups buzzed with feedback, even when his lights flickered, even when his team looked lost, he always had that smile. That excuse. That charm. And they forgave him. Meanwhile, I became a shadow again. The phone rang less. Emails slowed. My once full calendar began to empty. And every time I walked through the hotel, I saw his mark. His cheap tripods where my precision rigs once stood. His flimsy projectors casting pale imitations of the magic I once created. His people laughing as they tangled cables I would have laid like veins in the walls. It was like watching someone vandalize a masterpiece, and the world applauded him for it. I remember the first time I truly felt invisible again. It was at a corporate summit. I wasn't hired, but I walked past the ballroom to catch a glimpse. Inside, the stage glowed, but not with my work. It was his. The manager stood proudly at the doors, greeting guests, praising him as if he were a savior. And I stood outside, staring through the glass, feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. That night, I drove home in silence. No music, just the hum of the city outside my window, and the weight of something breaking inside me. The decline was quick after that. My savings drained. First went the luxuries, the fancy dinners, the new clothes. Then the condo. I packed my life into boxes, each one heavier with memory than weight, and left the skyline behind. The car followed soon after, repossessed before my eyes. I stood there powerless, as the machine I once polished every weekend was dragged away like a carcass. Piece by piece, my life unraveled. But it wasn't poverty that destroyed me. It was humiliation. Because every time I walked through those golden halls, I saw him, Mr. Disaster, smiling, laughing, acting as if he had built the world I once owned. And worse, everyone believed him. Managers nodded at him the way they used to nod at me. Staff whispered his name the way they once whispered mine. Guests applauded his illusions while forgetting the artist who had given them real magic. I became a ghost, forgotten, replaced. And late at night, lying in a bed that felt colder with every passing day, I began to ask myself questions I never thought I would. What was the point of all the years I gave? What was the reward for perfection if lies could win so easily? Why should I sit in silence while a thief wore my crown? The anger simmered. It gnawed at me. It whispered in my ears. And though I didn't know it then, those whispers were the beginning of something darker. Something that would not stop until the world remembered my name again, not with applause, but with fear. The anger that began as a whisper soon grew into a roar. I tried to drown it with work, but there was no work left. I tried to silence it with sleep, but my nights were restless, haunted by the neon smile of the man who had stolen everything. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. My phone sat on the table like a relic of another life, silent except for bills and debts. Friends stopped calling. The ones who once toasted my success now looked away, as if failure were contagious. The silence of abandonment was louder than any applause I had ever received. The hotel, once my kingdom, became a place of torment. I couldn't stay away, though. Some nights I found myself standing outside its glittering facade, staring up at the chandeliers glowing through the glass like mocking eyes. Inside, laughter, applause, music, his lights. My art replaced by his cheap imitations. And the world embraced it. Do you know what it feels like to be erased? To walk into a place that once carried your fingerprint on every wall, and to find not a single trace of yourself left, is not death. Death at least carries finality. This was worse. This was a slow burial in plain sight. One evening, I couldn't resist. I slipped inside. Just another guest in the shadows, uninvited, unseen. It was a wedding, the kind of event I had perfected once upon a time. The ballroom glowed, but the glow was wrong. The lights flickered ever so slightly, the sound buzzed at the edges, the air carried none of the warmth I once wove into it. And yet people clapped. They cheered. The bride and groom smiled as if bathed in magic, when all I saw was mediocrity dressed as brilliance. And then I saw him, Mr. Disaster, at the center of it all. Laughing, drinking, charming the crowd as if he had orchestrated heaven itself. He didn't even look at the stage. Didn't care about the details. He was too busy shaking hands, collecting praise that should have been mine. I stood there, invisible, my hands trembling. Not from fear. From rage. A rage so deep it felt like it could burn the whole building down. I left before the night ended, but his smile followed me into my dreams. That was the night I stopped being merely angry. That was the night I began to plan. But life had other cruelties in store first. My money dried completely. The little apartment I clung to was gone. I packed what I could into a bag and left the rest behind. For weeks I drifted, couch to couch, friend to friend, until even those doors closed. Eventually, I found myself sleeping in my car, a borrowed wreck of a vehicle from a cousin who pitied me. The leather seats cracked, the engine coughing each time it turned on. From balconies in the hotel, I had once looked down at the city lights like a god. Now I looked up at them through a dirty windshield, the skyline a cruel reminder of the throne I had lost. Hunger became a constant, not just for food, but for vengeance. Every bite of stale bread, every sip of cheap water tasted like ashes. And still, the world kept celebrating him. One night, I returned to the hotel. Not inside this time, but outside in the shadows. I watched the guests arrive, glittering in gowns and tuxedos, stepping out of sleek cars, laughing, smiling. I watched the lights inside flicker alive. And I imagined walking in with a torch, burning it all down. But no. Fire would be too quick, too merciful. If I was going to strike, it had to be perfect, precise, the way my art once was. It was during one of these nights, crouched in the shadows of the hotel parking lot, that I overheard them. Two of his workers, smoking by the loading dock, laughing about how careless he was. How he underpaid them, overworked them, treated them like tools. They laughed about how he barely checked his equipment, how he cut corners, how everything was held together by luck and charm. And in that moment, an idea bloomed inside me. If his empire was built on lies and shortcuts, then all I had to do was give it a push. One mistake at the right time, one failure too big to hide behind a smile, and his whole facade would collapse. I began to stalk him, quietly from the shadows. I learned his routines, his habits, his weaknesses, which events he prioritized, which equipment he reused, which lies he told. I became a ghost at his heels, watching, listening, waiting. And with every discovery, the anger inside me sharpened into something colder, something more dangerous. One night, I followed him home. He lived in luxury now, the kind of place I once dreamed of. A sleek apartment high above the city, windows glowing like molten gold. I watched him through the glass, drinking wine, laughing on the phone. Probably with a manager. Probably securing another contract that should have been mine. I imagined walking up there, knocking on his door, and ending it right then. But no. That would be too simple. Too short. I wanted him to suffer the way I had. To feel himself crumble piece by piece. Reputation first, then power, then everything. So I waited. The opportunity came at a gala, the kind of event that drew the city's elite. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities. The ballroom was to be transformed into a palace of light and sound. And of course, he was the one in charge. I walked in as a guest this time, blending into the crowd. No one noticed me. Why would they? I was invisible now. From the shadows, I watched his setup. I saw the flaws instantly. Loose wires. Overloaded circuits. Lights straining on unstable mounts. All hidden behind velvet curtains and clever angles. The guests didn't notice. The managers didn't notice. But I did. And when the moment was right, I slipped into the control booth. Not long. Just enough. One switch, one cable tug loose, one subtle twist. Small actions, invisible to anyone else, but enough to set the stage for disaster. I returned to the crowd, heart pounding, as the lights dimmed for the main presentation. And then it happened. The screens flickered. The sound cracked. Lights sputtered and died, plunging the ballroom into chaos. Guests gasped, stumbled, whispered. The managers rushed about, panicked. And there, in the center of it all, was him, Mr. Disaster. His smile faltered. His charm wavered. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. It didn't last long. He recovered, blamed a power surge, reassured the guests. But the seed had been planted. Whispers spread. Doubts formed. The managers frowned. I left before the night was over, a smile tugging at my lips for the first time in months. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a beginning. From that night forward, I became his shadow. At event after event, I slipped in, unseen, undoing his illusions piece by piece. A projector that wouldn't start. A spotlight that went dark at the worst moment. A microphone that screamed with feedback in the middle of a speech. Each time, his charm covered some of the damage. But not all. The whispers grew louder. The doubts deeper. And each time, I felt myself returning. Not to who I was, no, that man was gone. But to something else. Something sharper. Stronger. I wasn't just a technician anymore. I wasn't an artist. I was vengeance learning to walk. And soon, very soon, I would no longer settle for whispers. I would bring him to his knees in front of the very people who once crowned him king. This was no longer about work. No longer about reputation. This was personal. And when the time came, when the perfect stage was set, I would make sure he remembered my name again. Not in applause, but in fear. Revenge is not an act. It is a season. It grows like winter, slow, cold, and merciless, until one day the first snow falls and the world is never the same. By the time the city crowned him king, I had become his ghost. He didn't know it, but I walked the same streets, stood in the same halls, breathed the same air. Always near, never seen. Watching. Waiting. I didn't just sabotage him anymore. That was too easy, too shallow. No, I began to cut deeper. I learned the faces of his clients, his sponsors, his allies. I whispered in the right ears, left evidence in the right places. When a light failed, I let it look like negligence. When a screen cracked, I let it seem like carelessness. One by one, the powerful began to wonder, was this man as brilliant as he claimed, or just a fool wrapped in stolen glory? He still smiled, still drank, still laughed his way through the doubts. But I saw it. The strain at the edge of his grin. The bags under his eyes. The twitch in his hand each time the lights flickered. It was working, but whispers weren't enough. Doubt wasn't enough. If I was going to destroy him, it had to be final. Absolute. A downfall so public that he could never recover. And the stage arrived. The city's grand jubilee. The largest event of the year. A celebration that drew every name that mattered. Politicians, artists, the elite, the powerful. An event broadcast live across the city, streamed to millions. A stage so grand it could crown a man or bury him forever. And of course, he was in charge. The hotel became a palace once more. Chandeliers glowed like suns, walls draped in gold, the air alive with anticipation. It should have been my masterpiece. Instead, it would become his grave. I prepared for weeks. Studied every layout, every circuit, every point of failure. While he drank and boasted, I worked in silence, moving like a shadow through the back halls, planting the seeds of collapse. A wire loosened here, a backup removed there. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would show until the night itself. And when the night came, I was ready. I dressed like the staff, slipping in unnoticed. The ballroom swelled with music and chatter. Gowns glittered, glasses clinked. On stage, screens the size of walls glowed with color. Lights swept across the crowd, like blades of fire. And there he was in the center of it all. Smiling. Laughing. The master of the night. I stayed in the shadows, my heart steady. Not nervous. Not afraid. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. The show began. Music roared. Lights danced. The crowd cheered. He soaked it all in, arms spread wide like a king addressing his subjects. And then, at the height of it, I made my move. One switch. One sequence. The careful chaos I had designed came alive. The screens flickered, once, twice, then shattered into static. Lights blinked, twisted, died, plunging the ballroom into half-darkness. The sound system howled, a scream of feedback so sharp it made guests cover their ears. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose. Managers rushed to the stage, frantic. And in the middle of it all stood Mr. Disaster. His smile gone. His charm useless. He froze, caught in the blinding spotlight of failure. People whispered his name now, but not with admiration. With anger. With disappointment. With scorn. I watched from the back as the empire he had built on lies crumbled in real time. Contracts would be canceled. Sponsors would flee. His name, once golden, would be tarnished forever. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because I wanted him to see me. To know who had pulled the strings. So I stepped forward. Out of the shadows. Through the chaos and the murmurs. Until I was close enough that he saw me. And when his eyes locked on mine, recognition dawned. His face paled. His lips parted, but no words came. I smiled. Not with joy. Not with triumph. With finality. This was my stage, I whispered, low enough only he could hear. And now it's your grave. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him trembling in the ruins of his stolen kingdom. The crowd swarmed, the manager shouted, the guests fled. Behind me, the empire of Mr. Disaster collapsed, brick by brick, light by light. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. Not redeemed. Not restored. That man, the artist, the dreamer, was gone. What rose from the ashes was something else entirely. Something the city would never forget. Because legends are not born in applause. They are forged in fire. And my fire had only just begun. The hotel still stands. People still talk of that night. Some call it the fall of Mr. Disaster. Some call it the night the city learned the price of arrogance. But me, I call it Act 1. Because revenge is not an ending. It is a beginning. And the curtain has only just risen. Outro CTA voiceover style ending. If you've walked this far with me, remember my story. Remember the rise, the fall, the revenge. And ask yourself, if everything was stolen from you, if the world erased your name, how far would you go to take it back? Because one day your stage will come. One day your lights will flicker. And when they do, will you be ready?